In this video, we're going to take what we've learned about creating expressions, about custom attributes, about using set-driven keys, and we're going to combine it all together to form a control rig that's going to help us control our ball as it bounces through our scene. Basically, what we're looking for is a way to choose whether or not Maya will automatically handle the squash and stretch of our ball, or whether we're going to control it manually.
That's right. The automatic squash and stretch will be based off of the ball's altitude, where Maya's going to be smart enough to know that if it's doing automatic squash and stretch, that if the ball is down on the ground, it needs to be squashed. If it is up in the air, it needs to be stretched.
To simplify things even further to a level that, if you've been following along, you should be able to come right along with, we're going to set up a system where we can choose to tell Maya to either listen to a set-driven key or to listen to direct input from us.
Hey, there you go. And we're going to do this through the use of an expression.
That's right.
Now, let's go ahead and state this. You guys do not have to follow along. Basically, you should have your scene animated by now, and that's fine. Your curtains open up. They sway back and forth through the use of soft body dynamics. Excellent. Your ball bounces through the door. It almost looks like he knocks the door off the hinges. Excellent. He's squashing and stretching, bending forwards and backwards, so he has all sorts of personality.
Rock on.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to be deleting off that squash and stretch animation here in just a second. You guys do not have to follow along with this. Again, this is going to be a little bit more advanced than some of the things you've seen so far, but I really feel it's pretty straightforward. So, if you'd like, you can do File, Save As, and then start with a new scene, basically, or a copy of your scene.
Right.
Just so that you don't mess up anything that you've already completed and you may be happy with.
That's right. Don't get the idea that what you've already done isn't valid in any way. What you've done is great up to this point. What we're doing is showing you an alternate, slightly more advanced way to handle this problem.
That's right. And inside of Maya, there's always 50 different ways to do something.
That's it. It's really only limited by your imagination.
That's it.
So let's take a look at our balls animation real quick. I'll go ahead and hide my wall and my curtains, and I'll slide my range slider up. We already know the animation begins right about frame 47, so I'll hit rewind and play, and of course we've already got some nice squashing and stretching as we bounce through our scene, so everything's looking good at this point. Let's go ahead and bring back my end range as well, somewhere about frame 130 something. So here we go. We're just squashing and stretching. What we're gonna do is set up a few custom attributes. One of these attributes is going to give us a set-driven key scenario. Another one of these attributes is going to allow us direct input to the squash and stretch. And a third attribute is going to be a Boolean attribute, an on-off value, sort of a switch to allow us to choose between the set-driven key and direct input.
That's right. Let's go ahead and rewind, Zach. And how about we go ahead and kill out the animation that we have on the factor right now?
Sure. Well, let's go ahead and go to Show, and I'll show my deformers. To grab my squash handle, you see this little ring around my ball. If I click on that and come down to Input, Squash 1, we'll see Factor. I'll go ahead and select Factor, right mouse, and choose Delete Selected. So all that animation is gone, and if you hit play right now, you have this kind of pancake that flaps through the scene, because now all the squash and stretching animation is completely wiped out.
Yeah.
So, before we go anywhere, we need to set up the custom attributes that will drive our rig, and we're going to be placing these right on the talented ball object.
That's right. Anytime you create a control rig, you really need to think about where custom attributes need to go. They need to go somewhere where they're easily accessible to the animator.
That's right.
And in this particular case, it's going to be the sphere that we're animating, or our character, in this case the ball, so it only makes sense that the attributes are on the ball itself.
Well, sure, because the animator could, in effect, now come right back and remove deformers and no longer would need to see them after they set these attributes up.
That's right.
So we'll go ahead and go to Modify, Add Attribute. Now our first attribute is going to be called Driven Stretch. As I mentioned earlier, this control rig is going to allow us to switch between a set-driven key scenario and direct input from the user. So our first one's going to be the set-driven key style of attribute. We'll make the data type a float, like so. We will not worry about a minimum or maximum value. We'll leave it wide open, knowing ahead of time that we're probably only going to be animating between maybe 0.4 and negative 0.4.
That's right. You can always add custom attributes that don't have a min and max value.
Right. It's not necessary. So I'll go ahead and click Add, and you'll notice because of my syntax where I had all lowercase driven and just a capital S on the stretch, rewind the video if you've forgotten already, you'll notice that we now have driven and stretch as two separate capitalized words. Now, we'll come back and make our second attribute, which is going to be
stretch.
That's right, manual stretch. Again, note the syntax, all lowercase manual, capital S on the stretch, and it's also going to be a float. So if I click Add, it pops in down here, fits in very nicely. Last attribute we're going to add is going to be called auto stretch. So all lowercase auto, capital S for stretch.
Now its data type is going to be a bit different. It's going to be a Boolean because auto stretch needs to work as an on-off switch.
That's right. So we only need the Boolean
I mean, look
value.
at the name of it. Auto stretch. If it's on, then yes, let Maya handle auto stretching it. Otherwise, we're going to manually stretch it.
That's right. So I'll go ahead and click OK at this point. And now all three of my attributes are in place, and everything is looking good.
So let's go ahead and turn auto stretch on.
Okay.
And then we're going to start with a very simple expression. Let's go ahead and go down to our squash one. There we go. And then we'll select factor, right-click on it, and come to expressions. Now we're going to write a very, very simple expression to begin with so that we can set the set-driven key part up.
Right.
Now what's going to be controlling factor? Well, driven stretch is going to control factor for starters. In the end, it can be rather driven stretch or manual stretch depending on what auto stretch is set to. But right now, Zach, let's just go ahead and say that factor is equal to, and we'll say factor is equal to what? It's equal to driven stretch.
Right. So we'll go ahead and say squash1 dot factor is going to be equal to. Now, I can't just say driven stretch at this point. I have to call the entire object. The squash handle is an entirely separate object from the talented ball, so I have to specify talented ball. Notice my capitalization. It's just like the object appears in the hypergraph.
That's right, where only the B is capitalized.
That's right. Talented ball dot driven, all lowercase driven, capital S for stretch. Can't stress enough that that Mel, or Maya's embedded language, is going to be case sensitive, so be careful with that.
And while you only may have one line of code in your expression, it's still a good habit to put a terminator at the end, though if you do have only one line, terminators are not required.
Right. It's not a rule, but it's a really, really good idea to get in the habit of placing terminators. Nothing is more frustrating than doing like a 150-line expression, and then it won't work because right about line 72, you forgot to put a terminator.
That's right.
So,
yeah, let's go ahead and hit create.
We'll go ahead and click create at this point. You'll notice factor immediately turns purple. I will minimize the expression editor for the time being.
Let's try it out.
All right, so if I come back up to driven stretch and I start virtually sliding,
yeah, look at that.
You'll notice the information is being fed right down to factor, and right now driven stretch is at 0.9, factor's at 0.9.
So now we can go ahead and create a set driven key scenario where the translate y of the ball, the altitude of the ball, is going to control driven stretch, so indirectly it's going to control factor.
Right. This is very easy to do. What we're going to do is select our talented ball object, and he's going to be the driven and really the driver.
Yeah, he is.
So I'm going to go to animate, set driven key, set options, like we do, and he's already loaded in driven. I'll also load him in the driver. Now, what's going to happen here is translate y, the up and down motion of our ball, is going to drive the driven stretch attribute. Essentially, what we're saying here is that we want Maya to automatically know that when the ball is on the ground, when it is positioned right on the floor, it needs to be squashed down. When the ball is in the air, it needs to automatically be squashed up.
That's right, or stretched.
Right, or stretched up.
Yeah.
Squashed up. It's kind of interesting. So we have translate y, driven stretch, everything is good. What we need to do is go ahead and set where we want driven stretch to be. So we'll take driven stretch, and I'll set it down to -0.4, so we're all squashed down, and we'll key. Now, in a lot of cases, when you're using a set-driven key and you're using your driver and driven, you're going to want to update your driver. That's how it always works. Now, our driver in this case is translate y. Translate y is, in fact, already animated.
That's right. So who's driving translate y?
Actually, time in this case.
Time. That's right. So we can go ahead and move our time slider to a point where the ball is at its highest.
Right. We don't have to move translate y explicitly. We can just drag forward on the time slider until our ball is at the peak of one of its jumps.
There you go.
Like in this case here at frame 56. Now, with the ball up in the air, I'm going to select the driven stretch attribute, and I'll just stretch this guy up to maybe a value of about 0.4.
Looks good.
Looks pretty good. And I will hit key a second time. That's really it.
It's that simple.
That's it. I'll go ahead and close this, and now as I drag through on the timeline, look at this. We're squashed, we're stretched. Squash, stretch. Squash, stretch. Squash, stretch. And so on. Now, there's a couple of things. First off, our squash and stretch is no longer quite as good looking as it was a second ago. Second, once we get up to the stool, this technique we're using kind of kicks us in the teeth.
Kind of gets in the way because our sphere is now at a higher altitude in regards to his floor. He's almost got a new floor in a way.
That's right. That's right. So even though he's up on the stool and he has landed on something, the automation system we've created is getting in the way because now he no longer squashes back down when he hits the stool.
That's right.
This is exactly why we're going to need the ability to switch this system on and off. But first, let's edit this system a little bit to make the squash and stretch look a little better.
That's right. We can go ahead and edit the animation curve that's been generated through doing the set-driven key.
If you remember, when we were animating the squash and stretch on our own, we adjusted the curves of our factor so that our ball would kind of hold its stretch a little bit longer and more slowly retract down, so it didn't look like it was pulling away from the floor.
That's right.
So we're going to do the same thing here in a slightly different fashion. I'm going to go to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and we'll come down to Driven Stretch. Let's hit F, and there's our little curve right down there. So I see him down here in the corner. We'll hit F. So this is our relationship. You'll notice it's driven stretch being driven by balls translate Y. All I'm going to do is change the curve in between these two keyframes. Actually, I want it to arc up, like so. It's going to be like a fast out situation. Why am I doing this? If you remember the basic shape of our animated curves when we were doing this on our own, we kind of had that nice humped sort of look to each jump. And this is going to be the exact same thing, because we'd hump up, and then as our ball starts coming back down, we would come back the other way, so it'd actually be doing the exact same thing in the opposite direction. So very simple. I'm not even really going to have to change any of my tangent situations. We'll go ahead and select the first keyframe, select the out tangent handle, make sure the move tool is selected, and then middle mouse drag to put a little bit of fast out situation over here. I'll select my end keyframe and I'll grab its in tangent, middle mouse drag to something about like so.
And of course, you can always check this real quickly by moving the graph editor over to the side.
Sure, just
and
slide
then
them out of the way.
Yeah, and then just pick a point where the sphere is coming back down toward the ground. There you go. So we don't want him squashing until he's touching the ground.
Right, and in this case, he's really not. It's looking pretty good. So he's starting to kind of return back to his shape, and then right as he hits the ground, boom, he's squashed back down.
Yep, very nice.
So at this point, we can go ahead and close the graph editor, rewind, hit play, boing.
Look at that.
Boing.
We've pretty much got our animation back, but now it's being handled all through automation.
Right. And the reason we didn't do this from the get-go is, well, now
it's a bit more involved.
Yeah, now we have to set up a situation where we can turn this off and handle this manually, not only to take care of when he lands on the stool, but also once he's up on the stool, we might want to use that squash factor to kind of make him jive and dance and sing into the microphone or whatever.
After all, he is a talented ball.
He is a talented ball.
That's right.
So with that, let's go ahead and take a look back at our expression, which I did leave open down here in the corner, so I'll just open back up the expression editor.
And now, of course, what do we have an expression on? It's going to be the factor. So just go up there. Yeah, go up to by name.
Yeah, we'll go to by expression name, and we see expression 1, select, and here we go. Time to make this expression a little more intelligent, if you will.
Remember in the last video where we talked about if statements where we can make expressions intelligent?
Yes.
Well, we need to do that here. We need to take a look at auto stretch and see if it is on or off, if it's a value of true or false.
That's right. So let's move this line down a little bit, and I'll start my expression off with an if statement. We'll say if, open parentheses, and this is where things get a little bit interesting. How do we test this auto stretch attribute to know if it's on or off? Very simply, if you think about it, a Boolean is really nothing more than a binary attribute. It's going to give you a 1 or a 0, where 1 is on and 0 is off. So we could, if we wanted to, say if talented ball, let me go ahead and space things out, makes it a little easier to read, so we'll hit space, and then talented ball, capital B for the ball, dot, auto stretch, also pay attention to that capitalization, is equal to...
2 equals. Remember, 1 equal is the operator for assignment.
That's right.
2 equals is the operator for equality test.
Right. This is how we actually say, is something equal to something else? You just kind of hear it in your head like syllables. It's like equal to.
That's
just
it.
Hit your, and if you think it's like equal and then the number 2, so it's like equal to. Sorry, I thought it was funny. So if talentedball.autostretch is equal to 1, close parentheses. So that is our test. Maya's going to look and see if autostretch is equal to 1. If it is equal to 1, we want to pay attention to driven stretch, which is our automatic stretch system. If it is not, this is where we type the else. We come in and we say squash 1 dot factor is equal to, notice only 1 equals because this is an assigner this time, talented ball dot manual stretch. So what is this expression really saying? It's saying if auto stretch is on, we're going to listen to the driven stretch attribute. If it's not, so basically if auto stretch is off, we want to listen to manual stretch. That's all we're doing.
Now, just so that there's no confusion, you'll notice that at the end of the if line, there is no terminator, and at the end of the else line, there is no terminator. You will not have terminators at the end of those lines. This is a special type of statement that works together where if has an else. So, I mean, it's not like we're terminating the line and that's the end of the entire thought.
That's right.
And that's something that, to get a better understanding of, we really need to start diving a little bit deeper into MEL, and we're going to do that later on in this course.
That's right. We'll keep things simple right now.
So for now, just trust us.
Yeah, if you're super confused, then just go ahead, take a look at the screen, type in exactly what you see here, and it will become clear as you keep working with this.
That's right.
So, I'll go ahead and hit edit. Notice we get no errors, we just get result expression 1. I'll minimize the expression editor, and right now, if we just go ahead and look, auto stretch is on. So, you'll see we are squashing and we are stretching.
Yeah.
Everything is working just fine.
So rewind back to the beginning and turn auto stretch off.
So we'll switch auto stretch to off. Watch as soon as we do. Boom. Our squash disappears. Why is that? Because manual stretch right now is set to 0. So now as I bounce through, look at this. We've lost all squashing and stretching. Furthermore, if I grab the manual stretch attribute and virtual slide on the viewport, so we're now paying attention to manual stretch. And now if I switch this back to on or 1, we're listening to driven stretch, which is automatic.
Yep, very nice.
So with that, our rig is really complete.
Yep, and in the next video, we're going to use this rig to reestablish our animation. So with that, that's going to wrap up this video.
Let's go ahead and save our scene real quick, and that'll be the end of it.